When they asked why I was calm, I said, "Because I already know." The funeral parlor fell silent around me. 43 pairs of eyes turning to stare at the woman who'd just buried her husband without shedding a single tear. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, wearing the black dress David had bought me for our anniversary 3 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd chosen the dress I'd wear to his funeral. "What do you mean? You already know." Margaret, David's sister, leaned forward from the seat beside me. Her voice sharp, with the kind of suspicion that had defined our relationship for 12 years. "No, what? Exactly?" I turned to look at her, really look at her. Margaret had David's eyes, the same pale blue that could shift from warm to cold in an instant. Right now, they were arctic. "I know what you're all thinking," I said quietly. "I know what you've been whispering about since the moment the paramedics pronounced him dead. I know what you discussed in the kitchen yesterday while I was making arrangements. I know exactly what you believe about me." The silence stretched like a held breath. Behind us, I could hear David's business partners shifting uncomfortably in their seats. His golf buddies, his college friends, the neighbors who'd smiled at me for 12 years while secretly wondering what a man like David saw in a woman like me. "Alina," Margaret's voice carried the careful tone of someone trying to sound reasonable. "You're in shock. It's natural to feel disconnected after such a sudden loss." Sudden. I almost smiled. "Margaret, there was nothing sudden about David's death." Dr. Harrison, David's physician and longtime friend, cleared his throat from the third row. "Alina, I understand you're grieving, but David's heart attack was completely unexpected. He was in excellent health. His last physical showed exactly what he paid you to show," I said, still not raising my voice. "Clean arteries, strong heart, perfect blood pressure. All lies, weren't they, Dr. Harrison?" The color drained from Harrison's face. Around us, the murmur of confused voices began to rise like a tide. Margaret gripped my arm. "Alina, what are you talking about? You're not making sense." I looked down at her manicured fingers digging into my sleeve. The same fingers that had rifled through David's desk drawer last night while she thought I was sleeping. The same hands that had photographed his insurance papers with her phone. "I'm making perfect sense," I said. "For the first time in 12 years, I'm making perfect sense." I stood, smoothing my dress with the same careful movements David had taught me. "A lady never appears flustered, Alina. A lady maintains her composure no matter what chaos surrounds her." Even now, I could hear his voice coaching me through this moment he'd never imagined. "David died of a massive heart attack at 3:47 a.m. on Tuesday morning," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the funeral parlor. "He was alone in his study, working late as usual. I found him when I came down for my morning coffee. Those are the facts everyone knows." I paused, looking around the room at faces I'd seen at dinner parties and charity galas, faces that had smiled at me while their owners calculated my net worth and wondered about my prenup. "What you don't know," I continued, "is that David had been dying for 8 months, advanced heart disease, 3 blocked arteries, and a prognosis that gave him 6 months to live, maybe 8 if he was lucky." The murmur became a roar. Margaret shot to her feet beside me. "That's impossible. David would have told us. He would have told me. Would he?" I asked. "Would David have told his sister, who's been waiting for him to die so she could contest his will? Would he have told his business partners, who've been quietly positioning themselves to buy out his shares? Would he have told his friends, who've spent 12 years wondering when his young wife would finally show her true colors?" Dr. Harrison stood, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment. "Alina, I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not a game, doctor, it's a test." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with papers. David left very specific instructions about today, about what I should say, when I should say it, and how I should prove it. Margaret's voice cracked. "Prove what?" "That he knew exactly who each of you really were. That he spent the last 8 months of his life watching, listening, and documenting every conversation you thought he couldn't hear. Every plan you thought he didn't know about. Every assumption you made about what would happen when he was gone. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document, a medical report dated 8 months ago, Dr. Harrison's signature clearly visible at the bottom. Severe coronary artery disease, I read aloud. Patient advised of terminal prognosis. Estimated survival time 6 to 8 months. Patient requested complete confidentiality regarding diagnosis. Dr. Harrison's face went white. Alina, patient confidentiality laws don't apply when the patient specifically requested that his medical records be read at his funeral, I said. David signed a waiver. It's all here, doctor, including the recording of your conversation last week when you told Margaret that you'd be happy to testify that David's death was unexpected for a fee. The funeral parlor erupted. Margaret was shouting something about lies and manipulation. Dr. Harrison was backing toward the exit. David's business partners were huddled together, their faces grim with the realization that their carefully laid plans had just collapsed. But I remained calm, standing in the eye of the storm David had orchestrated from beyond the grave. You want to know why I'm not crying? I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. Because David and I spent 8 months preparing for this day. 8 months talking about death and legacy and the difference between the people who love you and the people who love what you can give them. I pulled out another document, David's real will, not the version his lawyer would read tomorrow. David left me everything, I said simply. The house, the business, the investments, the life insurance, all of it. But he also left each of you something special. Margaret stopped shouting. What do you mean? He left you the truth about yourselves? Margaret, he left you recordings of every conversation you had with his lawyer about contesting the will. Dr. Harrison, he left you copies of the falsified medical records you've been selling to insurance companies. Mr. Peterson, I looked at David's business partner. He left you documentation of the embezzlement you thought he didn't notice. The silence was deafening now. 43 people who'd come to mourn a man they thought they knew, discovering that he'd known them far better than they'd ever imagined. But Alina, Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. If he knew he was dying, why didn't he tell us? Why the secrecy, the deception? I looked at her with something that might have been pity, because he wanted to see who you really were when you thought no one was watching. He wanted to know if any of you would mourn the man or just calculate the inheritance. I folded the documents and put them back in the envelope. The lawyer will read the official will tomorrow at 10 a.m. I suggest you all attend. David has a few more surprises for you. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. At the door, I turned back to face the room full of people who'd underestimated both David and me for 12 years. You asked why I was calm, I said. It's because David taught me that the truth is the most powerful weapon in the world. And today, the truth finally gets to speak. I left them there, sitting in stunned silence among the flowers and the lies they'd built their relationships on. Outside, the October air was crisp, with the promise of winter. And for the first time in 8 months, I felt like I could breathe freely. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new consequences, new reckonings. But today, David's plan had worked exactly as he'd promised it would. Today, everyone got exactly what they deserved. I drove home through streets that looked exactly the same but felt entirely different. As if David's death had shifted the fundamental architecture of the world. The house sat at the end of Elm Street like a monument to 12 years of careful pretending white columns. Manicured lawn, the kind of understated elegance that whispered wealth without shouting it. Inside, everything was exactly as David had left it. His coffee cup still sat on the kitchen counter, half empty and cold. His reading glasses lay folded beside yesterday's newspaper on the breakfast table. The study where he'd died remained untouched, the door closed but not locked, waiting for me to find the courage to enter. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive Bordeaux David had been saving for a special occasion that would never come, and sat in his chair by the living room window. From here, I could see the neighbors' houses, their windows glowing with the warm light of ordinary evenings. Mrs. Chen was cooking dinner for her family. The Johnsons were helping their daughter with homework. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the woman next door had just detonated a bomb in a funeral parlor. My phone had been ringing constantly since I'd left the funeral home. Margaret, Dr. Harrison, David's lawyer, his business partners, even reporters, somehow word had already leaked about the scene at the funeral. I'd turned it off after the 15th call, choosing silence over explanation. The doorbell rang at 7:30. Through the peephole, I could see Margaret standing on my front porch, her face streaked with tears and mascara. She'd changed out of her funeral dress into jeans and a sweater, as if casual clothes might make this conversation easier. "Alina, please," she said when I opened the door. "We need to talk." I stepped aside to let her in, noting how she looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. Her eyes lingered on the family photos, David and me at various charity events, vacation pictures from trips she'd never been invited on. The wedding portrait that had hung above the mantel for 12 years. "Would you like some wine?" I asked. "I need answers," Margaret said, ignoring my offer. "Alina, what you said today, ... about David being sick, about him knowing things. I don't understand any of it." I poured myself another glass and settled back into David's chair. "What don't you understand, Margaret? How could he have been dying for 8 months without telling me? I'm his sister, his only family. Are you?" I asked quietly. "Because for the past year, every conversation you've had with David has been about money. His money. When he might retire, what his estate planning looked like, whether he'd considered updating his will." Margaret's face flushed. "That's not Io's, concerned about his future. Our family's legacy. You were concerned about your inheritance. That's not fair." I reached for the manila envelope I'd brought home from the funeral parlor and pulled out a small digital recorder. David started recording conversations 8 months ago when Dr. Harrison first gave him his diagnosis. He wanted to understand who the people in his life really were when they thought he wasn't listening. I pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "I'm just saying, David's not getting any younger. And that wife of his, God knows what she'll do with everything if something happens to him. We need to make sure the family assets stay in the family." Margaret went pale. "Where did you get that?" "Your conversation with cousin Robert last Christmas. David was in the kitchen, supposedly getting more wine. You thought he couldn't hear you." I fast-forwarded and played another clip. "Elena's been playing the devoted wife for 12 years. But we all know what she's really after. The moment David's gone, she'll probably sell everything and disappear. We can't let that happen." "Stop," Margaret whispered. "This one's my favorite," I said, finding another section. Margaret's voice again, this time talking to David's lawyer. "I need to understand the will situation. Is there any way to challenge it if, when the time comes, Elena's not really family? She doesn't understand what David built, what it means to our legacy." I turned off the recorder and set it on the table between us. Margaret was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "He heard everything," she said, "everything. But why didn't he confront me? Why didn't he tell me he knew?" I leaned forward, studying the face that looked so much like David's because he wanted to give you the chance to prove him wrong. For 8 months, he waited for you to ask about his health, his happiness, his fears about dying. He waited for you to visit without an agenda, to call without wanting something, to show even the smallest sign that you loved him for who he was rather than what he could leave you. I did love him. Did you, or did you love the idea of him? The successful brother who made the family name mean something, who could provide security and status and inheritance. Margaret stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is insane. David was paranoid, sick, not thinking clearly." "David was the clearest he'd ever been," I interrupted. "Facing death has a way of stripping away illusions. He saw everyone exactly as they were, including you." I smiled. The first genuine smile I'd felt in days. "Especially me." Margaret turned from the window, her eyes sharp with something between hope and desperation. "What did he see when he looked at you, Alina?" I reached into the envelope again and pulled out a letter, this one addressed to me in David's careful handwriting. He saw a woman who'd spent 12 years being exactly who she was, not who people expected her to be. A woman who'd married him for love and stayed for love, even when staying meant enduring the suspicion and resentment of everyone around him. You're going to read his letter to you, here. Now, just the part about you, I said, unfolding the pages. David wrote, Margaret will come to the house after the funeral. She'll be confused and angry and looking for someone to blame. She'll want to know why I didn't trust her with the truth about my illness. Tell her it's because trust isn't inherited. Margaret, it's earned. And in 8 months of knowing I was dying, she never once asked if I was afraid, if I was in pain, or if there was anything she could do to help. She only asked about money. Margaret sank onto the couch as if her legs had given out. I didn't know he was sick. How could I ask about pain I didn't know existed? You could have asked about his happiness, his loneliness, his regrets. You could have asked about anything other than his estate planning. But I thought he was fine. He seemed fine. He seemed fine because he was protecting you from the truth, the same way he'd been protecting you your whole life. I folded the letter and put it away. David left you something, Margaret. Not money. He left that all to me. But he left you something more valuable. The chance to understand what love actually looks like. The chance to learn the difference between caring about someone and caring about what they can give you. Margaret was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and broken. What happens now? Now you decide who you want to be. David's gone, so you can't repair your relationship with him. But you can decide whether his death teaches you something about how to love the people who are still here. And if I can't, if I don't know how, then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering why everyone you claim to love keeps their real selves hidden from you. Margaret stood to leave, moving like a woman who'd aged years in the span of an hour. At the door, she turned back. Alina, I'm sorry for everything I said, everything I thought about you. You didn't deserve that. No, I agreed, I didn't. But David knew you'd figure that out eventually. He had faith in you, Margaret. Even after everything, he believed you could become the sister he'd always hoped you were. After she left, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, thinking about the conversations that would happen tomorrow. The revelations that would unfold when David's lawyer read the real will. There would be more anger, more accusations, more people forced to confront the gap between who they thought they were and who they actually were. But tonight, there was just silence and the memory of David's voice on those recordings. Calm and sad, and infinitely patient as he documented the final months of his life. He'd known he was dying, and he'd used that knowledge to give everyone he loved one last chance to love him back. Most of them had failed. But failure, David had always said, was just another word for opportunity. The opportunity to do better next time. The lawyer's office felt like a courtroom the next morning, with David's family and associates arranged in careful rows according to their expectations of inheritance. Margaret sat in the front, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. Dr. Harrison had chosen a seat near the back, close to the exit. David's business partners clustered together like conspirators, whispering among themselves until the lawyer entered. James Morrison had been David's attorney for 20 years, a silver-haired man with the kind of gravitas that came from handling other people's secrets. He carried 2 briefcases instead of his usual one, and his expression was unreadable as he settled behind his desk. Before we begin, Morrison said, I need to address what happened at yesterday's funeral. Mrs. Whitfield, your ... presentation has raised some questions about the validity of the will we're about to read. Has it? I asked, my voice perfectly calm. Several people have suggested that David may not have been of sound mind when he made his final arrangements, that his illness might have affected his judgment. Margaret leaned forward. James, if David was as sick as Alina claims, shouldn't that invalidate any recent changes to his will? Morrison opened his first briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. That's an interesting question, Margaret. Fortunately, David anticipated it. He placed a video camera on his desk, its screen facing the assembled group. David recorded this 6 weeks ago in my office with 2 independent witnesses present. He specifically requested that it be played before the will reading if anyone questioned his mental competency. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly David was there, thinner than I remembered, but alert and unmistakably himself. He was sitting in the same chair where Margaret now sat, wearing the blue suit I'd helped him pick out for our anniversary dinner. "If you're watching this," David's recorded voice said, "it means someone has questioned whether I was capable of making rational decisions about my estate. Let me be very clear. I am dying, but I am not confused. I am in pain, but I am not delusional. I have never been more certain about anything in my life than I am about the contents of my will." Margaret made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. On screen, David continued, "I've spent the last 8 months observing the people I thought I knew, listening to conversations they believed were private, and documenting behavior they assumed would never be scrutinized. What I discovered was both heartbreaking and illuminating." David paused, looking directly into the camera with those pale blue eyes that had seen too much. "I discovered that my sister Margaret has spent the past year consulting with attorneys about contesting my will, despite the fact that I've never given her any reason to believe she wouldn't be provided for. I discovered that my physician, Dr. Harrison, has been accepting payments to falsify medical records for insurance fraud. I discovered that my business partner, Robert Peterson, has been embezzling from our accounts for 3 years." The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Dr. Harrison's chair scraping as he stood to leave. Morrison's voice stopped him. "Doctor, I'd suggest you stay." David left specific instructions about what should happen if anyone tried to leave during this recording. Dr. Harrison sat back down, his face gray with fear. On screen, David smiled the same gentle smile he'd given me every morning for 12 years. "But I also discovered something wonderful. I discovered that my wife Alina has spent 8 months caring for a dying man without complaint, without self-pity, and without a single conversation about inheritance or money. She has loved me through pain and fear and the gradual loss of everything that made me who I was. She has earned every penny I'm leaving her." The recording paused, and Morrison looked around the room. David made 3 versions of his will. The first, dated 2 years ago, left his estate divided equally between his wife and sister, with provisions for his business partners. The second, dated 8 months ago when he received his diagnosis, left everything to Alina except for modest bequests to family members. "What about the third?" Margaret asked, her voice barely audible. Morrison opened his second briefcase. "The third will was written 4 weeks ago after David had completed his investigation into the people around him. This is the will we'll be reading today." He pulled out a document that was significantly thicker than a typical will. David's final will is unusual in that it includes detailed explanations for each bequest, along with supporting documentation for his decisions. The video resumed, and David's voice filled the room again. "To my sister Margaret, I leave the sum of $50,000 and a collection of recordings that document her conversations about my estate over the past year. I hope these recordings will help her understand the difference between loving someone and loving what they can provide. Margaret, you are not a bad person, but you have become a greedy one. Use this money to buy yourself some time to remember who you used to be." Margaret was crying openly now, but she didn't leave. On screen, David's expression remained compassionate but firm. "To Dr. Harrison, I leave nothing except the evidence of your insurance fraud, which I've already forwarded to the appropriate authorities. You betrayed your oath and your patience for money. I hope prison gives you time to remember why you became a doctor in the first place." Dr. Harrison bolted for the door, but Morrison's voice followed him. "Doctor, the FBI is waiting in the lobby. David filed his complaint 3 weeks ago. To my business partners, I leave the company, all of it. The profitable parts and the parts that are hemorrhaging money due to Robert's embezzlement. You wanted control of Whitfield Industries. Congratulations! You now own a business that will be bankrupt within 6 months unless you can figure out how to run it honestly. Robert Peterson stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is insane. David can't just destroy the company out of spite. Morrison consulted his notes. Actually, Mr. Peterson, David spent considerable time ensuring that the company's failure would be entirely due to your financial mismanagement. He's documented every fraudulent transaction, every falsified report, every penny you've stolen. The company's problems are your problems. On screen, David leaned forward, his eyes finding the camera with laser focus. To everyone else who came to my funeral expecting an inheritance, my golf partners who spent 12 years making jokes about my trophy wife, my neighbors who smiled at Alina while gossiping about her behind closed doors, my distant relatives who suddenly became very interested in family connections when my net worth became public knowledge. I leave you exactly what you gave me. Nothing. The recording paused again, and Morrison looked directly at me. Mrs. Whitfield, your husband left very specific instructions about your inheritance. I nodded, though my heart was racing. Even knowing David as well as I did, I hadn't been entirely certain what his final decision would be. To my wife Alina, David's voice continued. I leave everything else. The house, the investments, the life insurance, the art collection, the vacation properties. But more than that, I leave you the freedom to finally live without justifying your existence to people who never deserved an explanation. David paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer, more intimate. Alina, you married a man 20 years older than you, and everyone assumed you were after his money. You endured 12 years of suspicion, resentment, and outright hostility from people who couldn't imagine that someone might love me for who I was rather than what I owned. You never defended yourself because you knew the truth, and you trusted that I knew it too. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care who saw them. The truth is that you saved my life in every way that matters. You made me laugh when I'd forgotten how. You made me feel young when I felt ancient. You made me believe that love was still possible when I'd given up hope of finding it. And when I was dying, you made me feel like my life had been worth living. The recording ended, leaving the room in absolute silence. Morrison cleared his throat and began reading the legal language that would transfer David's entire estate to me, approximately $47 million in assets, properties, and investments. But I barely heard the numbers. I was thinking about David's final gift, not the money, but the vindication. For 12 years, I'd endured whispers and accusations and assumptions about my motives. Today, David had used his own death to prove that love was real, that some people married for reasons that had nothing to do with money, and that the people who couldn't understand that said more about themselves than about me. Margaret approached me as the meeting ended, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. Alina, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. Not just for yesterday, but for 12 years of being exactly the person David said I was. You don't owe me anything, Margaret. Yes, I do. I owe you the truth. David was right about everything. I did love his money more than I loved him. I did spend years resenting you for having what I thought I deserved. I did plan to contest his will. She paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. But watching that recording, hearing him talk about how you loved him, I realized I don't even know what that looks like. I don't know how to love someone without wanting something from them. It's not too late to learn, I said gently. Isn't it? David's gone. I can't fix what I did to him. No, but you can decide not to make the same mistakes with the people who are still here. Margaret nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue that had seen better days. Will you? Would you be willing to teach me how to be better than I was? I looked at this woman who'd spent 12 years hating me, who'd plotted against me, who'd assumed the worst about my every motive. David had believed she could change. Maybe it was time for me to believe it too. Yes, I said. I think David would like that. 3 weeks after the will reading, I found myself standing in David's study for the first time since his death. The room still smelled like his cologne and the leather-bound books he'd collected over decades. His desk remained exactly as he'd left it, papers scattered across the surface, his favorite pen lying open beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. But today, I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to understand. Margaret had called that morning with news that changed everything. Dr. Harrison had been arrested, just as David had predicted. But the investigation had uncovered something none of us had expected. The falsified medical records weren't just about insurance fraud, they were about David's diagnosis itself. "Alina," Margaret had said, her voice shaking over the phone, "you need to see what the FBI found. David's medical records, the real ones, they're not what we thought." Now she sat across from David's desk, a manila folder in her hands, and an expression I couldn't read on her face. She'd changed in the weeks since the funeral, lost weight, stopped wearing makeup, traded her designer clothes for simple sweaters and jeans. Grief, I'd learned, looked different on everyone. "Show me," I said. Margaret opened the folder and spread the documents across David's desk. Medical records, lab results, diagnostic reports, all bearing Dr. Harrison's signature, all dated within the last 8 months. "These are the real records," Margaret said. "The ones Harrison kept hidden while he gave David the falsified versions." I picked up the first report. Dated 8 months ago, the same day David had told me about his terminal diagnosis. But the words on the page didn't match what I'd been expecting. "Patient presents with chest pain and shortness of breath. EKG normal. Stress test normal. Cardiac catheterization shows no significant blockages. Patient advised that symptoms are likely related. No evidence of heart disease." My hands shook as I read through report after report, each one telling the same story. David's heart had been fine. His arteries were clear. His prognosis was excellent. "I don't understand," I whispered. Margaret pulled out another document, a handwritten note in Dr. Harrison's script dated 7 months ago. "Patient continues to insist he's dying despite normal test results. Becoming increasingly agitated when told he's healthy, suggested psychiatric evaluation, but patient refused. Patient demanding terminal diagnosis. Offered to provide falsified records for $50,000. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of David's desk, trying to process what I was reading. "David wasn't dying," Margaret said quietly. "He was never dying. Harrison gave him fake medical records showing terminal heart disease because David paid him to. That's impossible. Why would David keep reading?" I found another note. This one in David's handwriting, tucked between the medical reports. Harrison agreed to the deception. "Alina must never know the truth until after my death. The cancer diagnosis will be more believable than heart disease. She's seen me losing weight, looking tired. She accepted without question. Cancer diagnosis. But David had told me he was dying of heart disease." Margaret handed me a final document, a letter addressed to me. Sealed and marked to be opened only after Alina has seen the medical records. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded David's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Alina, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth about my illness. I was never dying. I was never sick. Everything I told you about terminal heart disease was a lie. I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. I know you're questioning everything you thought you knew about the last 8 months of our marriage. Please, keep reading before you judge me too harshly. 3 years ago, I hired a private investigator to look into some financial irregularities at the company. What he found was worse than embezzlement. He found evidence that the people closest to me were actively planning for my death. Margaret had already consulted 3 different attorneys about contesting my will. Dr. Harrison was selling falsified medical records to help wealthy patients fake terminal illnesses for insurance payouts. My business partners had drawn up papers to buy out my shares the moment I died. Everyone around me was waiting for me to die, Alina. Everyone except you. So I decided to give them what they wanted. I decided to die while I was still alive to see how they reacted. The heart attack was real, but it wasn't fatal. Harrison and I staged the whole thing. He gave me a mild sedative that mimicked the symptoms of cardiac arrest, then declared me dead when the paramedics arrived. The funeral home was in on it too. The casket was empty. Alina, I've been staying at the cabin upstate, watching everything unfold exactly as I predicted. I know this sounds insane. I know it sounds cruel, but I needed to know who you really were when you thought I was gone forever. I needed to know if you'd grieve for me or celebrate your inheritance. I needed to know if the woman I'd loved for 12 years was real or just another performance. And now, I know. Alina, you passed every test I never meant to give you. You mourned me genuinely. You defended my memory when others attacked it. You handled my estate with grace and dignity. You even tried to help Margaret become a better person, despite 12 years of her treating you terribly. You are exactly who I always believed you were, a woman who married me for love and stayed for love, even when love became difficult. But here's the thing, my darling, I can't come back from the dead. Too many people know too much. The FBI investigation, the insurance claims, the will reading, it's all gone too far to undo. David Whitfield is legally dead, and he has to stay that way. However, there's a man named Daniel Walsh who's been living quietly at the cabin upstate. He's a widower, recently moved to the area, looking to start over. He's about your age, Alina. He's learned some hard lessons about the difference between love and convenience. And he's very much hoping that a certain widow might be interested in getting to know him. The choice is yours, my love. You can stay Alina Whitfield, wealthy widow, living off the inheritance from a husband who deceived you. Or you can become Alina Walsh, starting fresh with a man who's finally learned how to love someone without testing them. If you choose Daniel, you'll have to give up the inheritance. Dead men can't reclaim their assets. You'll have to leave this house, this life, these people who've finally learned to respect you. You'll have to trust that love is enough, even when it comes without money or security or social status. If you choose to stay Alina Whitfield, I'll understand. You've earned that inheritance through 12 years of putting up with my family's suspicion and my friends' assumptions. You deserve to enjoy the vindication of being proven right about everything. But if you choose Daniel, if you choose love over money, adventure over security, truth over convenience, he'll be waiting at the cabin. He'll be waiting for as long as it takes. All my love, in whatever form you'll accept it. David, P.S. Margaret knows. I told her everything yesterday. She's the one who suggested you should have the choice. I looked up at Margaret, who was watching me with tears in her eyes. He's alive, I whispered. He's alive. He faked his own death, to prove that you loved him for himself, not his money. Alina, I've spent the last 3 weeks talking to him every day. He's been going crazy with worry that you'd hate him for the deception. I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the garden David and I had planted together. This is insane. People don't fake their own deaths to test their wives. Desperate people do, Margaret said quietly. People who've been surrounded by vultures for so long, they've forgotten what genuine affection looks like. But the will reading, the recordings, the all real. David really did record those conversations. He really was disgusted by how we all behaved. The only lie was about being sick. I turned back to Margaret, studying her face. You knew. When you came to the house after the funeral. When you apologized, you already knew he was alive. I found out 2 days ago. David called me, told me everything. He said he couldn't let you make a choice without understanding all the options. And what did you tell him? Margaret smiled through her tears. I told him he was an idiot for thinking you might choose money over love. I told him you'd been proving that for 12 years, and if he'd been paying attention, he would have known it without staging his own death. I sank back into David's chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd done. He gave up everything, his identity, his business, his entire life. He gave up everything that didn't matter to keep the one thing that did. What if I can't forgive him? What if this is too much, too crazy, to then you'll stay here and live as Alina Whitfield, and he'll live as Daniel Walsh, and you'll both spend the rest of your lives wondering what might have been. Margaret stood, gathering the medical records and putting them back in the folder. But Alina, I've watched you for 12 years. I've seen how you look at him, how you light up when he walks into a room, how you've never once complained about the age difference or the gossip or the way his family treated you. You didn't marry David Whitfield for his money. You married him because you couldn't imagine living without him." She paused at the door. "The question is, can you imagine living without him now?" After Margaret left, I sat alone in David's study, surrounded by the life he'd abandoned to test my love. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd given up everything to prove I wasn't after his money. But in doing so, he'd made it impossible for me to have both him and his money. It was, I realized, the most romantic gesture anyone had ever made for me. And the most infuriating. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Alina, this is Daniel Walsh. I know this is crazy. I know you have every right to hate me. But I'm at the cabin, and I'm hoping you might want to talk. No pressure. No expectations. Just a conversation between two people who've learned some hard truths about love and money and the difference between the two." I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences and the strange mathematics of love. Then I typed back, "I'll be there in 2 hours. We have a lot to discuss, Daniel Walsh. I had a husband to resurrect and a life to rebuild, but first I had to decide whether love was really enough when it came without guarantees." The cabin sat beside the lake like a secret, waiting to be shared, smoke curling from its chimney into the crisp November air. I'd driven for 2 hours through winding mountain roads, past forests dressed in autumn gold, thinking about the conversation that waited for me at the end of this journey. David's car, or rather, Daniel's car. A modest sedan that bore no resemblance to the luxury vehicles David had favored was parked beside the cabin. Through the windows, I could see the warm glow of lamplight and the flicker of a fire in the stone hearth. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage I didn't know I'd need. 12 years of marriage, and I was nervous about seeing my own husband. The door opened before I could knock. David stood there, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. He looked different, thinner, yes, but also younger somehow. His hair was longer than he'd ever worn it, and he was dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt instead of his usual business attire. But his eyes were the same pale blue that had captured my heart in a diner 12 years ago. "Alina," he said quietly. "David, or should I say, Daniel," he smiled. The same gentle smile that had gotten me through 1,000 difficult days. I answered to both, though I'm hoping you'll help me decide which one I should keep. I stepped inside, noting how different this place felt from our house in the city. Everything here was simple, comfortable, real. No expensive art, no designer furniture, no symbols of wealth or status. Just a man living quietly by a lake, waiting to see if the woman he loved would choose him over everything he'd given up. "Nice place," I said, settling into a chair by the fire. "Very rustic. It's peaceful. I've had time to think." About what David Daniel sat across from me, his hands clasped in his lap like a schoolboy, waiting for judgment. About how badly I handled everything. About how unfair it was to test you without telling you it was a test. About how I let my paranoia about other people's motives poison my trust in the one person who'd never given me reason to doubt her. I studied his face in the firelight, looking for signs of the man I'd married. "You faked your own death, David. I know. You let me grieve you. You let me plan your funeral, bury an empty casket, mourn a husband who was actually hiding in the mountains. I know. You put me through 8 months of watching you die slowly, of caring for a man who was pretending to be terminal. I know." His voice cracked slightly. "Alina, I know how it sounds. I know how cruel it was. But I was drowning in suspicion and paranoia, and I couldn't see any other way to know for certain who you really were." I leaned back in my chair, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "And what did you learn? Was it worth it?" "I learned that you're exactly who I always hoped you were. I learned that you loved me enough to care for me through a terminal illness, to defend my memory after my death, to try to help my sister become a better person even though she'd treated you terribly for 12 years. I also learned, he continued, that I'm an idiot who nearly destroyed the best thing in his life because he was too afraid to trust it. Despite everything, I almost smiled. That's quite a revelation, Alina. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm hoping, I'm praying, that you might be willing to give us another chance. I stood and walked to the window that overlooked the lake. The water was dark and still, reflecting the last light of evening like a mirror. What kind of chance, David? You're legally dead. Your entire identity is gone. Even if I forgave you, what kind of life could we have? A simple one. A real one. Daniel Walsh is a retired teacher who inherited a small cabin from his uncle. He has enough savings to live modestly but comfortably. He's looking for someone to share quiet evenings and long walks and conversations that don't revolve around money or status or what other people think. And Alina Whitfield would have to disappear, just like David Whitfield did. You'd have to give up the inheritance, the house, the social position. You'd have to trust that love is enough when it doesn't come with financial security. I turned from the window to face him. You're asking me to give up $47 million. I'm asking you to choose between the money I left you and the man who left it. That's not fair. No, David agreed. It's not fair at all, but it's the only choice I can offer you. I walked back to my chair, thinking about the life I'd built as Alina Whitfield, the house on Elm Street, the respect I'd finally earned, the vindication of being proven right about my motives. Then I thought about the life I could build as Alina Walsh, unknown, unproven, starting over with nothing but love and the promise of quiet happiness. What about Margaret? I asked. Your business partners. All the people who finally learned the truth about themselves. Margaret knows I'm alive. She's the only one. She's decided to use her inheritance to start over too. She's moving to California, going back to school to become a social worker. She said she wants to learn how to help people instead of using them, and the others will live with the consequences of their choices. Dr. Harrison is in prison. My business partners are dealing with a bankrupt company. Everyone else learned exactly what they deserved to learn about themselves. David leaned forward, his eyes intense in the firelight. Alina, I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back the months of grief or the pain of thinking I was dying. But I can offer you something I've never been able to offer before. What's that? A love that comes without conditions, without tests, without the burden of other people's expectations. A love that exists just because it exists, not because it serves any purpose or proves any point. I was quiet for a long time, watching the fire burn down to glowing coals. Outside, night had fallen completely, wrapping the cabin in darkness and silence. I have a question, I said finally. Anything. If I choose to stay Alina Whitfield, if I take the money and the house and the vindication, will you be happy for me? Will you understand that I earned those things through 12 years of putting up with suspicion and resentment? David nodded without hesitation. I'll be proud of you. You deserve every penny of that inheritance. Alina, you earned it by loving a difficult man through difficult circumstances. And if I choose to become Alina Walsh, then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret giving up everything else for love. I stood and walked to the door, my hand on the handle. David watched me, his face calm, but his eyes full of hope and fear. Alina, he said quietly. I turned back to him. This man who'd loved me enough to fake his own death, who'd given up everything to prove that love was real. Yes, Daniel. His smile lit up the entire room. Welcome home. I let go of the door handle and walked back to him, back to the fire, back to the love that had survived deception and death and the weight of $47 million. Outside, the lake reflected stars like scattered diamonds. And inside, two people who'd learned the hardest lesson of all began the work of building a life that was worth more than money could buy. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, but what you're willing to give up for love.